Hi there, welcome to VMS Music Lessons for Electric and Acoustic Guitar. You've likely seen many players playing with the thumb draped over the top of the neck like this, be it playing certain things like chords, or certain lead techniques. And as a beginner, you might think that this is how you should begin to play as well. After all, many of the players you have seen and are looking to copy might be world-renowned players or perhaps even legends of the instrument. Unfortunately, this is a very common and potentially a very costly mistake that many beginners make. Fortunately, though, I am here to tell you what you should be doing instead, no matter if you are just starting out or if you have some experience and are looking to improve your technique. If you look at this common way of playing, you'll notice two things. First, this is largely a three-finger technique, with the pinky being almost completely left out. Second, you'll notice that the fingers I'm using are all locked in tight, with little to no room between them. Now, if you look at the technique that I'm going to show you in this lesson, you'll see all these problems have disappeared. The pinky is now an equal contributor to the other three fingers, and the fingers can now span a greater distance should I need it. Because they're not locked in tight down by the knuckles, you're going to have greater freedom to move. And this form is going to allow you to play certain things like bar chords, certain other riffs, things like scales. A simple way to look at it is this technique will allow you to do plenty of things for sure. However, this technique that you're going to learn is going to allow you to do everything. Playing the guitar with this type of technique is going to make everything that you do a lot easier on the guitar. As you can tell from the two demonstrations given at the beginning of the lesson, it's not going to be necessary for everything that you play. However, it certainly will be necessary for some techniques that we will eventually get into, but for the most part, everything else that you play is going to be a lot easier the more free and strong your technique is. It's important to also develop this from the beginning or as early as possible, because if you do not develop it soon, you run the risk that you might never develop it, and if you do begin to develop it later, you run the risk that it might not develop as fully and completely as it would have if you had started right from the very beginning. At the very least, you are going to have to go through the frustrating pains of having to undo a previous habit to introduce a new habit. So let's avoid all those problems and get you on the right track from the very beginning. Before we move forward, you should get to know a few terms we use to describe location and finger placement on the guitar. For now, we'll simply use the numerical naming of the 6 strings, with the thinnest string being the first, down to the second, and so on, all the way down to the thickest string, which is the 6th string. So again, first string, second string, third, fourth, fifth, and 6th. These segments, you see the neck divided into by these metal bars, we refer to as frets, F-R-E-T. So this would be the first fret here, second fret, third fret, and so forth. Lastly, your fingers will often be referred to by number as well, beginning with the index finger being 1, not your thumb, as you might do on piano or something like that. So first finger is, index finger is 1. Second finger, middle finger, number 2, ring finger, 3, and pinky is number 4. So, for example, if I want you to play someplace, I will describe these 3 parts. Let's go through some examples. If I want you to play the 3rd fret of the 6th string with your first finger, you will take your first finger into the 3rd fret area onto the 6th string right here. Another example, if I want you to take your 3rd finger onto the 5th fret of the 5th string, 3rd finger, ring finger here, onto the 5th fret of your 5th string. It's a few bits of information to have to process, but just take them one at a time. One piece of information at a time. It doesn't matter what order you take them in, just one piece at a time and you will find your place, no problem. So we're now going to try what's called a chromatic exercise. We will likely find this pretty difficult at first, but just stick with it for now and I'll give you some tips on how to make it a lot easier for you. So place your first finger into the 5th fret of the 6th string and play that note. Your finger should be right next to the bar, not on it. Definitely don't want to go on the bar. Try not to be in the middle of the fret or even to the left side of the fret. The farther away from the bar that you go, you're only going to have to press down harder to avoid any buzzing or rattling. So finger right next to the bar. Also, try to use your fingertip. The best description I can give you of what your fingertip comprises is get close to your fingernail. I'll give you a mark right here, see where that line of my finger is, right to the fingertip. So fingertip next to the bar, 5th fret, 6th string. Play that again. Now, keeping that finger down, very important. Keep your finger down as you go. 2nd finger into the 6th fret. Keeping both fingers down. Now put the 3rd finger down into the 7th fret, followed by the 4th finger into the 8th fret. All 4 fingers down at the same time. Once again, 1st finger, 5th fret. 2nd finger, 6th, both fingers down. 3rd finger, 7th fret. 3 fingers down. 4th finger into the 8th fret with all 4 fingers down. You likely found that anywhere from uncomfortable to absolutely impossible. So just relax your hand right now and let's take a look at some things we can do to make this easier for you. If you had some difficulty with the previous exercise, you're definitely not alone. And the primary reason for your challenges are likely the placement of your thumb. As you can see right now, you don't see my thumb draped over the top of the neck. It's hidden behind the fretboard right where it should be. And from this position, I could even get a full 6 frets with some pretty good strength as well. But if I take my thumb up and bring it over the top of the neck, you'll see my fingers get scrunched together and all bunched up, and now I cannot stretch them any more than I can right now. So all the potential that my hand has, as I demonstrated just a moment ago, has now been reduced to this. So if your thumb is not in the correct position, you're going to have a hard time doing what we just asked you to do. So what is the right place for the thumb? Let's look into it. First thing I want you to notice about my thumb here is that it's centered in the guitar. It's not up here or down here like that. It's right centered in the back of the neck. Second thing, it's straight. It's not angling to the side like this. So keep your thumb straight like that. Never should your thumb reach outside of your 1st finger like this. It should always be somewhere behind the 2nd finger like that. Lastly, thumb should be straight, flat like that. You don't want to bend your thumb like this, like you might do if you're playing violin or something like that. Keep your thumb flat. So in recap, keep that thumb centered, straight, and flat, not bent. If you're doing all of these things correctly, your wrist should be bent like this. If there's little to no bend in your wrist, something is off somewhere. So just make sure your wrist always has a pretty pronounced bend to it like this. In addition to not properly positioning your thumb, a lot of other issues can stem from not curling your fingers enough. Let's take a look at that now. Notice how the first 3 fingers are roughly equal in length, but that the pinky is markedly shorter. When using all 4 fingers as you play, it's vital to curl the first 3 fingers enough so that the tips of all 4 end up on the same line. So now, as my first 3 fingers are curled a lot, the pinky is roughly equal to the first 3. The 3rd finger tends to have the most trouble with this, perhaps because of its proximity to the shorter pinky finger, but just watch out for that one. It tends to overshoot a lot or buckle like this, and we're going to get to that in just a second. Lastly, always be certain to use your fingertips. I've stressed it before, because if you don't, your accuracy and your strength will suffer. Close to the nail is the best guide that I can give you, and if I press down right now and make some indentations in my finger and show you where my fingers hold down the strings, you can see right there what I mean by fingertips. But a pretty good guide for you is that if your fingers wobble like this, if you lose that arch when you press down, you're definitely not using your fingertips. So when you press down, you always want to be able to maintain that arch, that curl to your fingers. If you don't, if your fingers wobble like that, you are not on your fingertips. Now that we've covered what to watch for when going over the chromatic, let's go back and try it again, this time with an eye on our technique. Once again, place your first finger on the 5th fret of the 6th string. Follow up with the remaining fingers, but remember to always keep your fingers down as you go. This is a common exercise, you might have seen it before. The vital part of keeping your fingers down is too often ignored or not stressed enough. If you don't keep your fingers down as you play, you're almost wasting your time as you're doing it, so keep your fingers down as you go. Your fingers should have some space between them, as you notice I have right here. If you can't separate your fingers, it's likely that your thumb is out of position or that you're pulling your wrist back. And even if I hide my thumb so you can't see it right here, I still pull my wrist back. So the thumb isn't always going to be as obvious to you perhaps, but if your wrist is pulled back, it's definitely a giveaway that your thumb is out of position. So watch your form as you play. Fingers down. Thumb in proper position. Your wrist is bent. Fingers curled. Using your fingertips. Your fingers are always spread apart. Terrific thing about the chromatic exercise is that you always know what you're supposed to play. Therefore, you're going to be freed up to pay attention to how you are supposed to play it. Unlike a scale or a song, which will have a little more of a complex fingering pattern, the chromatic exercise is the same thing every string, same 4 notes, same thing over and over and over again. So when you go to a song or a scale, your attention is going to be focused on what finger you're supposed to use and where you're supposed to use it and the sequence of it, and you're going to get lost as far as your basic technique. Now the chromatic is the opposite. It frees you up from all the distractions of what finger to put down and where it's supposed to go, and allows you to focus exclusively on how you're playing it, to focus on your technique. And that is really what we're focusing on right now, just establishing the basic technique, so when you go to more complex patterns, these fundamentals have stuck and become habit, and you're ready to move on. As you attempt the chromatic, you might feel that you need to twist yourself around the guitar like this as you play. Definitely do it. Let your body compensate for what your hand currently lacks. The chromatic is not going to just help you develop better form, but it's also going to get your hand in shape. By doing the chromatic enough, you will rapidly increase your strength and your flexibility. It's important, therefore, to practice the chromatic until you're too exhausted to continue. You don't want to set out with a predetermined amount of times you're going to practice before you stop. For example, 5 times, something like that, and then you move on to the next exercise. You should continue until you're too exhausted, too tired to go any farther. I often use the analogy of sit-ups with my students. The aim of sit-ups is to do as many as you can until you're too tired to go any more. Similarly, with the chromatic, you should play it over and over again until you can no longer proceed. You're eventually going to feel the burn of fatigue. It could be somewhere in your forearm, your wrist, the palm of your hand, and your thumb. It happens for different people in different places, but eventually your hand is going to get too tired, and that's what you're looking for. Just make sure you distinguish between fatigue and pain. Something shouldn't feel wrong, just feel tired. So if you have had some damage to your hand, you've broken your wrist, had some nerve damage or something like that, just be careful to make the distinction. Lastly, if you need to decrease this challenge or increase it, there's a couple of things you can do. One, to make it easier, you can proceed to the higher strings. We've been trying this so far on the 6th string, on the 5th fret. If need be, you can go on to the 5th fret of the 5th string. And if that's still a little too tough, you can move on to the 4th string and try it and so forth. But if you do make it easier on yourself, be careful to quickly bring it back down to the tougher lower strings here, and eventually, to make it harder, down to the 4th, 3rd, and 1st fret. This is where your aim is to be, on the 1st fret of the 6th string, playing the chromatic repeatedly until you're too exhausted to continue. Once you become comfortable with the first challenges here in the chromatic, we will of course move on to further challenges. But for now, stick to what we've covered in this lesson. Do no more and no less than what I've outlined for you so far. Don't worry, for example, about your picking hand or working backwards through the chromatic. Just stick to only what we've covered in this lesson. Your aim is, for now, just to develop the proper habit, good strength, and good flexibility. The more you take on at this time, you're only going to be diluting your efforts. Just wait until what we've covered in this lesson has become habit, so we can comfortably add upon it without the whole thing coming down like a house of cards. Now, when it comes to some of the things we've covered in this lesson, they only pertain to the chromatic. Don't worry, for example, about your thumb placement when we go on to, or when you look at certain videos involving chords, for example. Let these lessons be self-contained, follow the rules therein. Don't blend them together just yet unless I purposefully say so in other lessons. Now, this chromatic is not just about developing good form and good strength. Really, what it leads to is scales. You've seen plenty of time certain lead techniques, certain things like that, and that's really what you're looking to do when you're playing the guitar. However, involved in all those different techniques, anything you just saw me doing right there, are all the fundamentals that I'm teaching you through the chromatic. So pace yourself, take your time, try not to jump ahead just yet. Just follow this step, this phase for now. Further phases will follow. So, in recap, a few things to watch for. Your thumb, behind the neck, not atop, behind, straight and flat. Your wrist should be fairly bent here, not back like this, bent wrist. Your fingers should be curled, not straight out, curled, apart, not closed, apart, curled, apart, down. A few things to watch for sure, but you have the advantage of being able to review the lesson at your leisure, and I definitely recommend you do so. Watch it a few times, become increasingly aware of what you're supposed to watch for, what can go wrong, try and catch yourself doing it. Just practice it repeatedly. You'll catch these things, you will improve, and you'll be ready to move on.